As the parent, we have the opportunity to be able to provide a homeschooling program that's tailored to their needs, to their abilities, and their strengths and weaknesses. Now, I think the public school programs, unfortunately, are, directed at kind of control of both the education and curriculum, the method of how it's provided. And while some parents, find it meets their needs, most parents find that they're not going to have the flexibility that they really need to meet the needs of their child in a public school program.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoy the program.
So, TJ, welcome to the HSLDA podcast. It's a little weird welcoming you to the HSLDA podcast since you have been at HSLDA about as long as I have. So let me just say today we want to talk about a topic that you have been tracking for HSLDA, and that's kind of the encroachment of public school programs calling themselves homeschool programs. But before we get to that exciting topic, I thought it'd be fun to kind of get to know you better, since I've only known you for about 20 years. And I think most of the people out there probably know you really well, but I'd like to personally get to know you better. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you, in the first place, come to work at HSLDA? 20 some years ago?
Almost 20 years. Almost 20 years. And so my story kind of begins really with my parents, because they kind of became interested in homeschooling back about the same time that HSLDA began. And of course, my parents didn't know that there were these two homeschooling dads, Mike Ferris and Mike Schmidt, over on the West Coast, and didn't know that they were defending homeschooling families. But my parents had gotten an interest, wanted to begin homeschooling us in the early 80s, and it took them 2 years to convince the local school officials to be able to homeschool my sister and I.
Are you the oldest or second oldest?
No, I'm the oldest of eventually 9 children. But, this was really, once my parents were sending us to the public school, I had an hour bus ride one way. And there were other reasons that my parents were interested in homeschooling. They'd heard Dr. Dobson's radio interview. Actually, it was a replay of the interview with Dr. Moore. Mm-hmm. And so that really prompted their interest in homeschooling. And it was through that experience of taking 2 years to convince the local school officials to begin homeschooling, and kind of, as a child, kind of experiencing that we really became interested in and learned about HSLDA. Honestly, my homeschooling experience was just an adventure. The 11 years that I was homeschooled for much of that time enabled us to travel the world. We went to 2 different countries as foreign missionaries, and it just was really an adventure. And so, as a young adult, and I began an interest in law, and of course knowing about HSLDA, it was a great experience for me to be able to come to work here at HSLDA, and I really feel like it's provided me a real good insight in an ability to be able to advocate for other homeschooling families.
Now, you actually started here as a legal assistant. Working for Chris Klicka?
Well, no. So Chris had actually interviewed me for a position that he had, but I had not taken my finals. I went to Oak Brook College of Law, and I had still had to complete my finals, and then I was going to take the California bar exam. So Chris had interviewed me, but he told me, hey, wait, don't come to HSLDA, finish your school. And I'm so grateful that, he did that. But I actually came to work first for D. Black. And he had at the time 2 legal assistants. And so I had taken the California bar exam, didn't know whether I'd passed or not, but came on as a legal assistant. And it's been a great almost 20 years.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I recall, you started at HSLDA as a single man in
Yes.
What year?
So it was 2002, April of 2002, I came to HSLDA. And I was single, but there was a young woman that I was interested in, and we were kind of in that initial stages of writing and courting and dating, and got married in 2003. And my wife and I now have 7 children, and we're about ready to graduate our first child this spring. But I would say that it's my wife primarily. She's been, of course, the main homeschooling parent. I've just been able to call myself a homeschool dad, but she's done, a tremendous job in doing the educating.
So when we both, I came to work here in the summer of 2001, and a year later, we had our seventh and final child, and she just graduated as well. So we've had a similar track, but generally one generation apart.
Right.
So tell me, as you started out as a legal assistant, and then it wasn't that long after that you became a contact lawyer in your own right.
Yeah, it was about a year and a half after that. At the time, of course, working with D. Black, and he was a tremendous attorney here at HSLDA. Had been working, I think, almost 25 years, if I remember correctly. And he provided a great foundation for me as a new attorney, working as a legal assistant here at HSLDA, and helped kind of enter me into that task of being a staff attorney here at HSLDA. And so I'm very grateful for that, and just have had a great many years working here.
So describe for us your duties and your typical day.
Well, as a staff contact attorney, I have the privilege of talking with a lot of families who are dealing with difficult issues. And many of them have conflict with their school district, not because of their own desires, but because their school district is telling them that what they're trying to do in educating their children is not correct, or that they're not able to educate their children at home. And so I spend a lot of time on the phone talking with these members, with my legal assistant, gathering information, gathering letters and contacts, and then, of course, reaching out to these school officials. Sometimes we deal with social services or other government officials who are coming in between those families, their children, and their desire to homeschool their children.
And we sort of divide up the workload amongst the staff attorneys by states. How many states do you have in?
Yeah, currently I have 8 states, and those range all across the country. We do divide them up primarily by level of contact, and as you well know. And so the state that I have the most contact with is, of course, New York. But then I have states like Florida, New Mexico, Kentucky, Oklahoma. So it really provides me a great opportunity to interact with families all across the country and help them with the unique challenges that they have in their homeschooling program.
Over the years, you've also kind of developed some expertise in areas that affect homeschoolers across the country, but tell us about some of those things you focus on.
Well, so obviously as a staff contact attorney, we do have the opportunity to get involved in various different things. And one of the things that I've been able to do is work with the NCAA and assist a number of families who are interested in their children maybe playing sports as they get into college. And so, how to be able to prepare and document their high school work and provide that information to the NCAA so that they can ultimately determine their eligibility for college sports. So that's been a really great and rewarding experience in helping families with.
Great. So with 7 children still homeschooling, what's it like for you and Susan to be a homeschool family and be a homeschool advocate?
Right. Well, I think, so both of us were homeschooled almost all of our lives. And so that brought a great personal experience into our own homeschooling program. We learned a lot of things from our parents, many things that we liked, some things that we didn't like, not necessarily what they did, but maybe some of the curriculum. And it's provided a really rich, I think, homeschooling environment for our family. But there's also been, challenges. As any other homeschooling parent, you want to feel that you're doing the best job that you can for your children. I think my wife and I talk frequently about, are we doing everything that we can do? And are we really preparing our children for that next step? And as a homeschool advocate, of course, my wife and I have these conversations, about what to do if we had contact from our school officials, or what to do, in preparing for college. How do we do transcripts? We have 2 children who are kind of in that process right now. And so, all of the things that I've learned here at HSLDA have been obviously great use in my own homeschooling program as well.
So is it safe to say that you're just like a typical homeschool family?
I would say probably a pretty typical homeschool family. I mean, we have 7 children, and our kids are involved in a lot of different activities, both with our church, with our community, and we just enjoy being able to spend time with each other, and helping our children in finding the goals that they're interested in their life, and helping them to achieve that. So I would say we're a pretty typical homeschool family.
That's one of the strengths of HSLDA, in my view, that the most of the founders founded HSLDA because they both wanted to homeschool and were facing legal challenges, and helping the early homeschoolers who were facing legal challenges. All of our attorneys have either homeschooled their own children like I have, or were homeschooled themselves and are now homeschooling their own children. And there's just a deep affinity for not just the legal stuff, but the actual operation of a homeschool family lifestyle. Right. And you've been one of those people that in my time working here have made, I think there's like 4 attorneys now that were single when they started and now have large families.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think HSLDA has been a great place, for our family to grow up and to work. And, it really is, something that I'm, grateful for, not only the blessing of HSLDA and what we do here, but, of course, my own parents and the foundation that they laid in enabling, my wife and I to be able to continue to homeschool our children as well.
Well, the topic for today is new programs that are kind of, they're public school programs, but they're appealing to people by calling themselves a variety of homeschooling. So give us a background on how those arose. I mean, I think it's a response in part to the pandemic and people, in-person learning being more of a challenge. But give us your background, give us some background on how this issue arose, and let's talk about it some.
Sure. Well, so I think we all have seen these types of programs spring up in our various states across the country. Obviously, one of the more recent situations was in Washington State, where they hired teachers, they obtained a facility, and then they sent out advertisement proclaiming...
Now, they being who?
The Washington School District, public school district, send out information and advertisement to homeschooling parents and say, hey, send your children here to be homeschooled. And again, it's being run by the public school system. I think this past year alone, I've talked with a number of families in Kentucky where they began homeschooling because of the pandemic and really enjoying it. We're planning on homeschooling this year, but they received visits over the late summer and early fall from their local school officials, trying to entice them back into the public school system. And at least one parent received some communication from their school officials right there at their front door, 2 officials telling them, hey, here's our public school programs, and oh, by the way, we can audit your homeschooling program. So they really felt that this was some kind of implied threat. And when I confronted the school officials, they said, oh, no, that wasn't a threat. We're just trying to, tell all these families about all the programs, all the great programs that we have here in the public school system. So I think we're seeing a lot more of these types of situations across the country.
How are people responding to that? Because traditionally as homeschooling grew slowly but steadily over the decades, most homeschool families wouldn't really welcome a visit at their front door from school officials. How is it treated in Kentucky? How did the families view it? And is it different if it's an old-timey homeschool family or kind of a pandemic response homeschool family?
Well, I mean, I think any family who gets a visit from school officials, they're immediately on edge. The feeling is, well, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? And I think in the vast majority of the situations we see, of course, these families are doing nothing wrong. They've complied with the law. They're doing everything that they should be doing. But then, to get this intimidating contact from school officials, I think particularly depending on each state, I think Kentucky's done a really good job of helping to educate new families on what's required in their state law. And obviously HSLDA over the years, we've worked with state organizations all across the country to work hand in hand in providing, the information on what's actually required, what they need to do.
When you say state organization, what are you referring to there?
Well, what I'm talking about is every state has a homeschool state organization. And these state organizations, many of them have really been operating since modern homeschooling has kind of taken off in the early 80s. And so they have usually a relationship with state and local groups in their region and provide education, information, support in these families who are trying to teach their children at home. And so HSLDA has, for as long as I've been here, worked very closely with state organizations because it's a joint effort for us in providing information and advocating for homeschooling freedom. And they're kind of the boots on the ground in those states, assisting families who are wanting to teach their children at home.
So in Kentucky, for example, what's the state homeschooling organization's role been as the public schools are trying to either entice or intimidate people back into the public school?
Well, so in Kentucky, it's CHEC, Christian Home Educators of Kentucky. They've been there for many, many years. And one of the ways in which they reach the homeschooling community is having a Facebook group. And this is a group to thousands of families all across Kentucky. And they are regularly providing information, conversations, even connecting families together on maybe meeting for, field trips and other things. But what they're particularly involved in is when they hear of situations in Kentucky where school officials are, visiting homes or, trying to tell parents that they need to do something different, they reach out to us. They put, many of these families in contact with us. If they don't already know about HSLDA and are not already members, many ways that's how we first hear about it is through CHEC, through homeschooling families or support groups in Kentucky. You say, hey, families in my community are getting visits. And I think that's really one thing that the homeschooling community does really well is, we're together. Each family has different homeschooling, philosophies, different homeschooling programs, but they work together in helping educate, helping new families, particularly those in the pandemic who may not have had any experience homeschooling until just now.
Yeah, so the Facebook group, Facebook didn't exist when my wife and I started homeschooling, but it's always been important for homeschool families to be connected with each other. And so how is that, how are the new homeschoolers, so many of the people that, were sending their children to public school and in-person learning closed down, maybe didn't think of themselves or see themselves ever homeschooling, and then suddenly they find themselves homeschooling. How important is it for those people to succeed, for them to, connect with other families and other groups? How your experience in 20 years of working here?
No, I think it is very important. Obviously, we want to see all these families to be able to successfully homeschool their children. And that's really one of the reasons why HSLDA is out there, is to help provide the assistance and information to help these families. And I think a lot of the families who are beginning because of COVID, they didn't, as you said, see themselves initially as a homeschool family. But because of the circumstances of their family, because of the circumstances of their community, because of COVID, they decided we needed to do something. And many of these families are very concerned about, are they going to be able to do a good job? Just as I think all of us are concerned about, our children are our primary concern and wanting them to be successful, wanting to have a successful homeschooling program. And so I think they are looking for resources and information. One of the things that HSLD does is the You Can Homeschool website that we put out there, having really strong connections with state and local support groups, because I think more opportunity for these families to get the help and support that they need, that's going to, provide that success that they'll have in their homeschooling program.
So why does HSLDA take a pretty strong position on supporting private homeschooling, privately funded homeschooling, and kind of take a, not really favor public-private partnerships in education?
Well, I think it's all about who gets to direct the child's education. And obviously, when you're the parent and you're privately directing your homeschooling program, you have the ability to determine what's best for your child, what's best for your home. I think obviously, as both of us have 7 children, none of those 7 children are exactly the same. they have different learning styles, they have different abilities, they have natural gifts, and natural interests and inclinations. And as the parent, we have the opportunity to be able to provide a homeschooling program that's tailored to their needs, to their abilities, and their strengths and weaknesses. Now, I think the public school programs, unfortunately, are directed at kind of control of both the education and curriculum, the method of how it's provided. And while some parents, find it meets their needs, most parents find that, they're not going to have the flexibility that they really need to meet the needs of their child in a public school program. And obviously the public school programs have other concerns, and they're often, very heavy-handed in how they manage, those children that are being educated under their program.
So are you familiar with any other of these new programs where the public schools are working to get people back through various means?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a number of situations, as I said, all across the country. I can think of in Florida, for instance, we had a number of homeschooling families contact us. In fact, one of the interesting things for me in Florida, again, another one of my states, but you're required to submit, or when you establish a home education program, you're required to submit a notice. And many of the counties have a notice form that they provide of these parents. But on that form, they actually have the parents answer the question, are you going to be providing instruction through our virtual school program, or are you not going to be participating in the virtual school program? So in Florida, they have designed these virtual school programs, and they're trying to market them to homeschooling families.
So by virtual school, what is that exactly?
It's basically an online educational mode of instruction that they provide through the school district. And so in Florida, homeschooling parents can participate in classes if they desire to do so. They don't have to do full-time enrollment. But a lot of these school districts are very intentional in trying to market their programs and even putting it on the forms that they want parents to submit.
Why do you think the public schools are motivated to do that?
Well, because it's, they get funding. They get money for every class that they can entice homeschooling families to participate in. And for some parents, again, those classes may be beneficial, but it's very much motivated by the school district's desire to capture the funds that student would bring in. Because when they're homeschooling, they generally don't get any funding for that student, and so they want to be able to get that money.
And the full-time students in the virtual programs, the
Absolutely.
School district gets more money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's, what we see kind of all across the country. Many of these schools programs are motivated by their opportunity to try to collect these students full-time if they possibly can. And so they're wanting to recapture these students who they've lost.
Well, what would you say to those families who, for whatever reason, just recently found themselves homeschooling, maybe unexpectedly? Any words of, advice or whatever for those families? Yeah,
well, what I would say is you can do it. I mean, I think anyone can homeschool their children. And while homeschooling may not be for everyone can homeschool their children. Really, it takes, that commitment, that desire to do it. Just as my parents many years ago had that desire to begin homeschooling us. And, my wife and I had that homeschooling. Your wife and you had the desire to homeschool. Everyone can do it. And we have here at HSLDA the support through information on what's required legally. We have consultants. We have many individuals who can help you. And we can also connect you with your state and local support groups so that you can have someone who can help you when those difficult times come up. All of us are going to face, questions. Did I really do the right thing in homeschooling? But, we have the support that's available out there. And I think here at HSLDA, we're here to help you in being able to homeschool your children. And, again, I think that you're not alone. That's kind of the thing that I would try to say.
Yeah, the homeschooling in America is an interesting study in a social movement beyond just a way to educate children. And it grew up as a grassroots from the bottom up. Nobody told us to do it. Nobody funded us in doing it. Nobody told us how to do it. We all just kind of joined together in our own unique little ways, in our own unique little communities. And sometimes if if those didn't continue to work for us, we'd change communities or we'd change methods. And as you mentioned, I mean, I have 7 children, and they are very different in learning styles, personality, attention span, in so many different ways. And homeschooling allowed us to be able to address each of their individual needs. So as a final pitch, TJ, what do you think, parents out there should be wary of as these public programs kind of rear themselves in different ways? What should we be looking for, and why should we be wary of them?
Well, I mean, I think the old adage is true that if it sounds too good to be true, that it is. And a lot of these programs, begin by really trying to entice you to join the program, telling you all the great things that they can provide. And what they don't tell you is obviously the strings, the requirements that are going to come, the testing. Over the years, we've seen programs where some of the online virtual programs, one parent I can remember in particular was shocked to learn that the public school was going to have the teacher talk with her child on a weekly basis. And when mom wanted to be on the phone call, the teacher said, "Oh, no, you can't be on the phone call with that teacher when they're talking with your child." And so, you don't understand kind of the freedom and, really even that intrusion into your home in some of these programs. So I think being attentive to what these programs are offering and understanding that they're not telling you the full story, that there's going to be a lot more connection. Many of these programs start off trying to entice parents in, and then really, once they've got you, then begin saying, okay, here's the additional things that you need to do. So being wary of that. And, while for some parents, it may be a step out of the public school system. I think for most of us who've made that decision to homeschool, it's a step backward into control and regulation.
You'd mentioned a program in Washington State. So we've written an article about that program,
Yep.
and we'll have a link to that article in our show notes. And it tells a little bit more about what happened there in Washington State and what to be looking for. So, TJ, any final thoughts? Final thoughts about the topic at hand, or your career at HSLDA, your homeschooling adventure? You know what? I kind of meant to ask this, and I'm going to just take a flyer at this. But your family is actually very intriguing. And you mentioned your foreign mission trips. In your family was pretty involved in adoption. Tell us a little bit about that. That's always intrigued me.
Yeah. So my, my parents were on the foreign mission field. My dad had gone to a foreign mission trip, and we were homeschooling. And he really felt, hey, we could do this as a family. And so we went over to Haiti and lived a number of years in Haiti, and then some in the Dominican Republic during the embargo years, the 90s. And while there, my parents had an opportunity to help local churches, local medical teams, and then also some orphanages. And my parents had 6 children, but felt like, well, maybe God had more. And we ended up adopting my 3 younger, 2 brothers and sister from Haiti. And so they're Black, but they just turned, my brother just turned 24, sister's 24, and my youngest brother is 23. Just have a great time with them, great relationship with them. And, it was all because of our decision to begin homeschooling, my parents' decision. And, just opened up, our adventures into adoption. And, it's been a great experience.
Well, thank you. My guest today has been TJ Schmidt, staff attorney here at HSLDA. He's been here almost as long as I have and has risen through the ranks in a dramatic fashion. Very, very important member of our team here. Our topic today has been how the public school system is trying to entice people who have been homeschooling, at least recently because of the pandemic, back into the public school system, and trying to alert you to what to be aware of and why the privately funded homeschooling movement is a really good thing for you and for your children. Again, the article about Washington will be posted in our show notes, and we really appreciate your time joining us. And please Let us know if you have any questions. You can email us or call us, and we'd be happy to help them. Thanks again, TJ.
Well, thanks for having me.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's legal support team. We know homeschooling isn't always easy. That's why we're committed to giving you peace of mind so you can focus on giving your kids the best possible education. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized legal advice from our team of attorneys to help you comply with your state's homeschool law. And we'll represent you if your right to homeschool is ever challenged, even in court. Every day, we help our members respond to overreaching officials, and we stand ready to defend your homeschool against unlawful attacks. To learn more about how you can enjoy a worry-free homeschool experience, visit hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave a review to let us know what you think. To hear more conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to this podcast or head on over to hslda.org/podcast for more inspiring stories and awesome ideas about homeschooling. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll see you next time.